Hello, I'm Manoj Kumar. I'm faculty here at the Azim Premji University. And today I have with me Professor Manish Thakur. Manish is here for a conference organized by the School of Education. And the conference is on education and the construction or constitution of social. And Manish, by training, is a sociologist, currently working at IIM Calcutta in an academic group which is on public policy and management. Manish has been doing work in sociology and the kind of work he has done. It's difficult to categorize, but broadly he has worked on the idea of Indian sociology, how this Indian sociology has been practiced over the decades and centuries now. So in a sense, he was doing some bit of intellectual history, right? Manish has also worked on this idea of Indian village. He has conceptually sort of explored this idea of Indian village and how this Indian village has been sort of constituted through the public policy discourses and program implementation. So this is another dimension of his work and related work in present studies. So a lot of things all through his work, he was sort of focusing much more also on political sociology. Welcome, Manish, and thanks for coming here, and thanks for agreeing to this discussion also. So the one question which I have, because you have been exploring this, traditions of Indian sociology, and to the extent I know, Indian sociology is preoccupied with few issues and questions such as caste, such as this idea of tradition and modernity. Right? Indian village study is one strong tradition in Indian sociology, and several similar issues and topics. Coming from education, we have this question: how education figures into how much reflection we find, sociological reflection we find in Indian sociology on education as such, and school education particularly.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you for a very generous introduction, first of all, and I'm happy to be here. I would say that you are not off the mark when you say that as a discipline, Indian sociology has been preoccupied with caste, village, joint family, and things like that. And much of the investment, intellectual investment, has been around these themes. However, since you invoked this binary of tradition and modernity, so one of the pet themes that Indian sociologists have worked with has been social change. And through that angle, I want to bring in your question of education.
Right.
So in my limited understanding, even though education has not been one of the preeminent themes for sociologists of the earlier generations, in terms of research, in terms of deeper intellectual engagement, but when they talked about social change, they did look at education as one of the most potent mechanisms of social change. So in that sense, themes like social stratification or social mobility, these themes would have some components of their interconnections with education.
Right.
And when I say education, I mean modern education, the education that has come to us.
Right.
So in that sense, education was embedded in some other subdisciplines of Indian sociology. But much later, as you are aware, that we did have, or we do have now, an independent subdiscipline called sociology of education, of which I know nothing, because I have never done even an elective in that field. But as a general student of sociology, I look at education from that angle. Secondly, this binary, jokingly we can say that, much of Indian sociology can be captured in two sentences. One, that caste inheres class and class inheres caste, or, India is both traditional and modern. So there is a unique blend of tradition and modernity. So education at a much higher level of discourse for some of the historians, you refer to intellectual historians, they have also looked at education as a new type of discursive non-endogenous intervention. Sociologists always play with binaries. What is endogenous and what is non-endogenous? So modern education in that sense has been non-endogenous, rather exogenous. So in that sense, as a non-endogenous, I'm saying, intervention, it did unsettle the old cultural codes with which we were familiar as a society. So as a society, we had caste, we had a sense of ritual hierarchy, we had a sense of an entire range of cultural codes which would help us make sense of what type of communities we are or we have been. Of course, all these would keep changing, but we did have a sense of even those changes in terms of old cultural codes. But modern education, by its sheer newness, does intervene and unsettle those cultural codes. So, and I look at it at two levels. So, in one sense, modern education helps the earlier established classes because now they have access to a new world. So, you already have your dominance, your hegemony, or your well-entrenched interests in a world which is operated by old cultural codes. And at the same time, you also have, that is so-called tradition within quotes. And at the same time, since and because of your first thing, your felicity with the traditional world, because you were high caste, you were landed, you were ritually superior, you also had access to the new cultural universe, which gave you access to the new structure of opportunities. So in that sense, education comes in Indian sociology as also a mechanism which has helped in the sense, not in any emancipatory sense, but which has helped reproduce older type of inequalities, and they have also created new type of inequalities. But mostly these two types of inequalities, old and new, they have been in tandem with one another. But at the same time, that is not the entire narrative. We also have education as a seeding ground, which has also led to the questioning of this very idea of the production of inequality, where many movements have been animated by the new conceptual language of justice, human rights, all the indignities that caste system has brought to us and things like that. So that's how I would like to look at education. I don't know whether I'm clear, but yeah.
So would it be right to say then that question of education actually came somewhere in the picture because the concern was around this tradition and modernity, and concerns were around this stratification, question of stratification, a very peculiar kind of stratification in Indian society. So in that context, there was some kind of some way of alluding to the idea of education, right? So this is one way of looking at sociological reflection on education. The other side of it, that if you look at the kind of size and scale of school education now, and if you compare it with the kind of size and scale we had in 1947, we had less than 20% literacy back then. Now at least children are in school, almost 100% children are in school. I mean, there are concerns around learning level and all, but schooling is happening. So in that sense, schooling and education and the possibility of schooling and education sort of producing certain kind of society and being a major sort of social site in some ways. So whether social theorizing or sociological theorizing is keeping pace with it, or you feel that there is much more which we need to do in that direction?
So let me begin with where we have ended. First thing I would say is that it's not keeping pace, and I don't know why it has not been able to keep pace with the type of changes that you have mentioned. But I would like to add 2-3 things to what you have already said. Number one, we should also remember that we should not get carried by the scale and reach of school education that you are seeing nowadays. We all know, and you know better than me, that after independence, elementary education was not the most important public policy agenda. We keep talking about IITs and IIMs and higher education. So higher education somehow did have an upper hand compared to primary education in the initial decades after independence. Number two, much of the social sciences in India or maybe in other places also would have been shaped by the agenda of the post-independence state. In that sense, if you look at 1960s, and I'm talking about education, so we did have some research, massive research, in fact, whether education is leading to the inclusion of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. If you recollect, there was a massive pan-Indian work inaugurated by Suma Chitnis from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And since you are interested in this sociology of education, Tata Institute of Social Sciences has been one of the places where this started early. And in my reading, one of the early factors was this work that was sponsored by Indian Council of Social Science Research. And it was again linked to the idea to see whether modern education is inclusive enough, it's being accessed by the earlier, historically hitherto deprived groups and all that. So that is another line of research that has been there in sociology of education. So the sociology of education in relation to scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and all that. In a different way, later we also have had research whether their limited inclusion in modern education has led to some kind of formation of elites among them. But that also leads me to say something else, that when you are talking of education in India, in hindsight, you also have to see that even when sociologists are not directly engaging with education, they are compelled to engage with education. And that comes through the back door of something called reservations in this country. The type of public visibility or the sensitivity that we have around the issue of reservation, and reservations are in the fields of education and employment. So that in a way, indirectly, that puts education under that limelight. So, and there I would say that there has been work by sociologists on reservations, and if you extend that, so in a way sociologists have engaged with education through this idea of reservations and things like that. That's all I have to say.
It's very interesting. I mean, this is possibly one way one can put it, that sociologists are compelled to work on education, because you're dealing with other questions also, you can't just sidestep, because somewhere the processes of education are quite central to some of the questions we are trying to answer, right? Whether it's a reservation, whether it's such questions of inclusion and exclusion, questions of social mobility. Right, so that way it's interesting that, so that means it looks like the education has very compelling presence, right? In any kind of, any processes of modernity or any processes of modernization. But looking at the scenario now, because definitely the things are happening in school, many things, like earlier it was not there, midday meal, you can count on midday meal. There are this biometric identification through which admissions are happening. There are so many apps being used by teachers these days. There are a lot of things happening which possibly require some kind of empirical exploration. So conceptually, of course, we can engage with the question of education and the idea of education. But then there are certain everyday practices which you see right there in the school and colleges. So considering all that, considering the entire field, the way it is taking shape now, what are some of the things on which sociology of education can conduct research, or we can sort of...
In a belated fashion, I would suggest that education is being addressed frontally these days. Look at the work that your university is doing. This itself, in a way, is embodiment of the new kind of engagement with education, where I'm sure you look at everyday practices, you look at empirical field data, and not only the earlier type of questions that sociologists tangentially would address. So that's happening. Also, something that I forgot to mention earlier, the education vis-a-vis religious minorities.
Right.
So you have also seen that we do have serious ethnographic work on madrasas,
Right.
or different types of schools, ethnographic work and all.
Right.
So that is also another line of serious anthropological ethnographic engagement with not necessarily higher education, but schools as social institutions, everyday practices, and things like that you are talking about. And also the one thing that universities like yours, they have been trying to bridge the earlier disconnect. Earlier, we had this, I don't know why you would be better placed to talk about that, but we had this disconnect where education could never be part of the university's disciplinary structure.
Right.
And I think this is not only in India, even otherwise, the disciplinary hierarchy keeps on shifting. So suppose even you talk about UK and also, education was not seen as a serious academic disciplinary engagement the way some of the other social sciences were seen as. So maybe that is changing the way we are talking about teachers' education these days, and how teachers' training itself is an important component. Earlier, those were two different worlds. The places where primary teachers, secondary teachers would get trained, your degrees like B.Ed and things like that, did not have much to connect with the type of things that university faculty would do, or university teachers would do, or the type of research that sociologists would have done. So I see things more optimistically, that now there is more porousness. The earlier type of boundaries are getting more porous, which is good for education, and which is good for social sciences in the larger sense of the term, because now they have, given the sheer scale that we talked about, that now so many millions of children are there in schools,
Right.
and they are making demands on the system, and their learning abilities are being assessed almost every year, and those things have implications for the type of nation, even now I am saying that term, we want to be. So given all that, I see that there is a growing entanglement between the academic disciplinary research of the earlier type and much more, I would not use the word policy driven or applied, but much more everyday oriented, practice oriented, where there is this idea that inputs can come from both sides. It's not
Right.
that top down, that as a sociologist of education you have to offer something to those who are teaching in elementary or higher secondary schools. It could be that some of their best practices can make your research much more meaningful, and can give you a new way of looking at things than what you were doing earlier.
Yeah. Pleasure talking to you, Manish.
Nice.
We need to possibly continue this conversation. This is very, very fruitful, quite
Yeah.
productive, and possibly this kind of discussion is required or needed to kind of bring certain issues for our research and practices in education. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.